Hey everybody, it's Mark Pattison, former NFL player, now climbing the 7 summits, and welcome to another fantastic episode of Finding Your Summit, all about people overcoming adversity and finding their way. Okay, look, 7-8 years ago, I had to step into the fear and put a big ass goal out there, and so I decided to start climbing all these crazy mountains around the world. It's been an absolute amazing journey. And, you know, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I've actually done 6 of the 7. I've actually been on Denali twice. I've been on climbed successfully Kilimanjaro twice. But now it's Mount Everest, the biggest boy on the block, 29,000 plus. And I'm headed over there April 2020, and I'm totally keyed up. And I'm keyed up because I've been doing all this preparation. I train like an absolute bear and really putting myself in a position of success. I'm going to be climbing with one of the top climbing outfitters in the world. Excited about that. And just the mountain has fascinated me for years, I'm sure like others, but really excited to do so. And so if I can actually pull this thing off, I'd be the first NFL player to do so. And so as we speak today, there's not that many first in the world. So I look forward to tackling that. Okay, so that's one. 2 is I totally appreciate the listen on these different podcasts. I really do. And it's been an amazing journey, as I said, from not just interviewing these people, but being on the other side of the mic and really taking in their incredible stories of doing amazing things. And look, we all need to be inspired. And so if I can help provide and find more people that meet that criteria, all the better. And we all need that motivation, and we all need those words of encouragement that you can make it back relevant to your own situation, and then plow forward in whatever endeavor you are trying to do. Okay, so I appreciate that. And if you want to find out anything that I have going on, you can do so at markpattisonnfl.com. I've got a book out now called Finding Your Summit, go figure. And it is essentially the playbook to what I had learned from my Hall of Fame coaches on how to emerge and do some great things in your life. It doesn't have to be mountain climbing, of course. It can be anything, but it's a plug-in that you take on these different things, these different goals, these different strategies that I've set forth, that they set forth for me. And good things can come from that. Okay. Also on the website, you can find out more about my expedition. Obviously, I'll be going to Mount Everest, and we'll have more information about that coming up. There's an e-learning course, and of course the podcast. And when you go to the podcast, you will find an iTunes tab. And I would be so grateful if you go in and you'd rate and review. Now, it all has to do with visibility, popularity of podcasts, because there's so many podcasts out there today that it's so easy to get lost and like, where's Finding Your Summit? And I really do believe these stories are really amazing and incredible, and can really give a lift to those people who really need it. And even if you don't, we all need to be motivated and inspired by other people to keep going. So if you'd go in and do that, I would be really, really appreciative. Okay? So let's go listen to the pod. It's going to be awesome. Here we go. Hey everybody, it's Mark Pattison back again with another phenomenal episode of Climbing Your Summit, all about people overcoming adversity and finding their way. And once again, we have another star on the pod. His name is Chris Warner. He is an entrepreneur, a leadership expert, an Emmy-nominated filmmaker. He just returned from a crazy mountain in the Himalaya, and we are very jacked to have him on the pod today. Chris, how you doing?
Great, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Well, I mean, you're giving me an answer right now that you didn't give me about 3 minutes ago before we went live, which is you just returned from a crazy mountain and you're down a bunch of weight and you're probably gaunt and your feet hurt and everything else. And so I'm sure the last thing you want to do is this pod, but I appreciate you coming on and bringing the energy.
Well, no problem. Yeah, I did just get back from Nepal. We were on a peak called Maklu, which is the 5th highest peak. And we summited that a week ago. And then you know how those go. You really don't sleep for the 3 or 4 days before you go. Summit day for us was 19 hours of constant moving. And then, then you like, all right, as fast as I possibly can, I want to get on a helicopter. I want to get on a plane. I want to get back to the United States. So in that 10-day time period, you probably miss 3 or 4 days of total sleep and average a lot of 3 or 4 hour days. Plus you have the 12-hour time zone difference. So you have all that stuff kind of, that and the lack of the altitude or oxygen. I think it really probably lowers your IQ by about 40 points. So I'm 40 points down in IQ right now.
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, so how many days were you on the mountain?
We were quick. It was really just me and one Sherpa. So I was 5 weeks from door to door,
Yeah.
which is unbelievably fast. I mean, when I had done K2, we were 89 days door to door. So this was a kind of a smash and grab expedition into the Himalayas.
Yeah, I think the point I want to make, and you're right, I have done these mountains, not as many as you have done, but I think what people sometimes don't understand is just the living conditions of going up and down the mountain. And, there is the whole part we have to acclimate, but at the same time, it's not like you can bring big fat cheeseburgers and steaks and everything else. I mean, a lot of what you have to bring is what you have on your back. They do make it a little bit more cushy now on Everest Base Camp, but the bottom line is refrigeration is tough. And so you have to really be creative about the way you try to fuel yourself, throughout the journey. And that is why you lose a bunch of weight and you get gaunt. And at the same time, the whole key, I think, around mountaineering, at least for me, has been not just your physical shape, not just your emotional shape, but also the nutrition that you put in your body.
Yeah. And it is hard, as you said. I mean, especially when you're at 24,000 feet or 25,000 feet, just trying to find an appetite to begin with. And then you're just trying to keep enough, fluids on to stay hydrated. So you do end up in this stage of just constantly starving your body. Even at base camp, above 19,000 feet, we kill more cells in a day than our body can produce. So we're constantly atrophying. And that's all part of the process. Can you get your butt literally that kicked and still get up the next day and perform at a high level? And really, that's where, luckily there's a whole bunch of us who have kind of figured out what it takes to keep our bodies moving when we're not feeding it and taking good care of it, but we still want to achieve our goal.
Yeah. So have you now done 6 of the 8,000 meter peaks?
I have done 6. Yeah.
Yeah, congratulations to you. So,
thanks.
Look, you've got we're going to get into a lot of this different stuff, and it's very fascinating to me because I'm on a lot of the path that you've been down.
Actually, we missed each other in Antarctica by a couple of weeks, I think, because I was there in that crazy December period where we got stuck in the 12-day storm. And then were you there in January?
Yeah, so I do know there's a gal named Emily Farkas who.
Yeah, she was camped right next to us.
Yeah, no, she's a great gal, and
she sure is.
Yep, and I knew that she was down there with Mike Hamill and that group.
Yep.
And unfortunately, I want to talk about this a little bit right now, just because it's kind of brought it full attention. So yesterday there was a death on Mount Everest. Don Cash. Don was my actual tent mate in Vinson. And, it's heart-wrenching. I can also tell you from that expedition that although there's a lot of love flowing, and it should be, for Don from his family and extended others, when we came back, I told a number of people that, my tent mate was a guy that was headed towards Everest. And I thought he would either die or have severe things happen to him. He lost 3 fingers June 3rd on Denali. I had to be helicoptered off, and he's just, some people built to be in the mountains and have that mindset. And I didn't feel like there's a couple things to that with self-care and just the physical part of being able to take care of yourself in the mountains. And again, there's no disrespect. I feel awful for the family, but I could see this coming. And as I said before, I had mentioned this to a number of different people. Tragic.
Yeah. That is tragic. I used to guide Everest, and we used to tell people before summit push that there's 19 ways that you can die on summit day. And we used to tell people, just from the study of risk, we know there's always a third thing that kills you. And you've already made 2 terrible mistakes just being here, right? Because you're in this, far and distant place with the high risks. You're at this extremely high altitude where human beings really shouldn't be. And if one more thing goes wrong, the consequence is death. And that's why you had to be completely aware of those 19 things, those 19 red flags. And then if you saw one of these things, you had to make the decision to turn around and go back home and try again in the future. And too often, you just look at, like on Everest, the top 4 reasons why people die are human error. And so in general, people go to the mountains and kill themselves as opposed to the mountains killing them. We do have extreme things that happen, like the avalanches that happened on Everest a couple of years ago, et cetera. But there's way too many cases of people just continuing to go up when they should have turned around and gone back down.
Well, it was interesting because I had brought this new Garmin InReach. It's not new, but it was new for me, right? And so since we were tent mates, it has the ability to do a couple things. One is to track your progress at the mountain. The other is to communicate with those. It pairs with your cell phone, with your iPhone. And so in the tent, I kept giving him the ability to communicate with his wife, and he really appreciated that. And so on this trip to Everest, which he left a couple months ago, he had bought one of those InReach. And so I'm going to your point here, which is, he turned it on, and 2 nights ago I was, intently watching his progress up the mountain. And I mean, he had not even reached the summit at 19 hours, right?
Yeah.
And you could just see and it was the same way on Vincent, very slow. And so, and then the second mistake was he went with a outfitter that
I know Pioneer.
Yep. So the bottom line is they did not tell him to turn around, which he didn't, and so human error, and he just punched a one-way ticket. And again, it's just, you got to be smart. And the reason why I'm bringing this up, and I want you to come on this too, Chris, is just because I think what's happening is all the condolences are going around right now, as they should be, and everybody's thinking of him as what a warrior going up and taking the top. But, there's the realities of just understanding what your own human limits. Like, for example, I could never go run in a triathlon, the big ones that they have in Hawaii. I'm just not built to do that. And I understand that. And if you're not built for those types of things, you shouldn't be there in the first place. And then you got to have the self-discipline you just described to turn your ass around and get yourself back so you can go back to your family.
Yeah. Mark, I think that the sad part to me is there's already been 12 deaths in the Himalayas this on 8,000 meter peaks this spring. Yeah. The sad part to me is when you see people pushing themselves higher, so the further you get from camp, the greater the danger that you're exposing yourself to. And when you see people that are completely exhausted but refuse to turn around, you really know that they're not the only person who's going to be suffering the consequence of this. It's the rescuers who are going to now be asked to go up and spend, all this time in altitude, risk frostbite, cerebral edema, all this other stuff. Obviously, just risking, slips and falls, which could kill people. And then, obviously, there's a big consequence to the people back at home. And I'm not sure. I used to think a lot about this as a guide, trying to figure out how to get people to be a little bit more internally motivated than externally motivated, because a lot of people are, they're driven by, I'm going to be popular on Facebook, or I put this goal out there and the consequences of me coming back having not summited is too great to my ego. So as a result of that, I'm going to take a chance. I'm going to take an extra chance. And there's this, so it's a selfish act to put yourself in that much danger, because there are other people who are going to pay the price for your mistakes. There's also there's a misconception about the power of reaching the summit versus the power of turning around. And yes, you will grieve because you didn't summit, but the truth is you grieve whether you summit or not, because when you have this gigantic goal that you've set out for yourself, you've organized your life around this goal, and suddenly you've achieved this goal. You've now created this giant void, right? You had this dramatic arc that you were moving to, and now all of a sudden, you've reached the summit, you come back home, and there's just a void that you live with. So you're going to grieve either way. And the coolest thing about mountaineering is, failure is built into the sport, and the process of dealing with failure after failure after failure really improves what psychologists would call your self-efficacy, right? Your ability to pick yourself back up again when you've been knocked down. And for many of us, it's the greatest thing we get out of, any of these kinds of things where we push ourselves to our limit is it's actually learning about ourselves. Like, what's our ability to pick ourselves back up again? What's it going to take? What's it going to take to grieve through the success or grieve through the failure so that we could be successful again in the future? And I think that people, it's easy to shortcut that process. Like, assume that going through those ups and downs are, I don't know, they're just not as important. And we know, like, because we've all been there, we've all gotten our butts kicked. We know that we look almost more back fondly on our failures than our successes. There's better stories associated with getting your butt kicked and pulling yourself back up again. There's better learnings that come out of that. There's better self-awareness that comes out of that. So I think that there needs to almost be a new dialogue in things like 8,000 meter peak climbing and other things, where the power of the failure is given more energy, and as a result of that, people will forgive themselves more for not reaching the summit. And as a result of that, I think we'd have a lot more people that aren't going to make these selfish decisions to keep pushing themselves up when they should have turned around.
Yeah, I think that also entails having a very strong personality with your guide, and the guide is God, meaning that they're number one and everything trickles down from there, no matter if you agree with that decision or not. I was on Denali in 2017, and it was, I know you've experienced this, but blizzards and cold weather and minus 80 degrees and things like that. And I had never factored in, like, I wasn't going to summit a mountain because I'm strong and I train and I do all these things. And it was just circumstances that I personally could not get over that was going to lead me up to the top of the mountain without losing my life or my hands or something. And so I had to turn around, and that was hard. And that was hard because I knew I was going to have to come back and redo it, which I did successfully last year. But at the same time, it's an interesting mindset. And I want to talk to you about this because I know you do go around the country and you talk about, leadership and what it takes and partners and all this stuff. And, when you get into something, and, for guys like us who are driven, and the things I've done in the past in the NFL and mountain climbing business, and you put, like, this is the goal and nothing's going to stop me no matter what. But now all of a sudden you have to make that big boy decision of you're going to spin around and go back and not go after something that you just already committed. And there's a real internal thing that goes on in your mind and your body to get you, recalculated so you can actually make that right decision.
Well, you're absolutely right. And again, there's something in this overachieving mindset that we think that we aren't going to be able to live with our failure. So we'll do everything we possibly can to not fail, including put ourselves at this tremendous risk. And I think when we all look back at it with a little bit more hindsight or wisdom, then we realize, actually, no, it's actually through the failures that I learned the most. And so why was I so afraid of failing that I was going to do put myself in these other completely stupid situations?
Hey, this pod is sponsored by Laird Superfood. So many products to choose from your InstaFuel, your coffee, your tea, your smoothies. And I love the superfood creamer and use the hydration powders like the beets, the coconut, the matcha, the turmeric to mix all into my 7 Summit smoothie. And it's so good. Log on to lairdsuperfood.com and get your 20% off when you use the code MARKP20. Okay? So get your Laird Superfood, and I guarantee it will help fuel your journey. Absolutely. So I want to shift mountains just a little bit, but stay within the whole danger zone here, and recognize that you're one of the few Americans in the world that Americans that have ever done both Everest and K2. K2 is the second tallest mountain in the world, considerably way more dangerous. I had a guy named Garrett Madison on.
I love Garrett. Yeah,
Garrett's a great dude. Yeah. Met him down in Vincent, actually. And so from your standpoint, what makes K2 such a beast, and what was your mindset when you went down there? Again, keeping in the framework of this whole thing about knowing that you have a goal, but you also want to keep the door open towards, going home if it's not right.
Yeah. So I was on 3 different K2 expeditions. So the very first expedition I went on was led by a guy named Henry Todd, and he had gone around the world and picked what he thought were the best climbers in the world. So, everybody's resume was through the roof, and they were your heroes, the guys you'd read about in all the magazines. And it was such an honor to be chosen to be on that team. And we get to Pakistan and we start to travel, which takes about 10 days from Islamabad to base camp. And probably on the 3rd or 4th day, man, we started bickering. And I realized that this was a group of complete prima donnas. Like, everybody was the best of the best, but nobody was the best teammate. Everybody was the best leader. Everyone was the best athlete. And so we were a terrible, terrible team. And that expedition ended for me when we were trying to go from, back up to Camp 2. So we'd left base camp and we'd gone to Camp 1 and we were about to climb up towards Camp 2. And as we're standing on the bottom of the mountain, strapped on our crampons, suddenly somebody started to scream, and through the sky, I mean, K2 is so steep. It's like more like a skyscraper than a mountain. And through the sky, tumbling through the middle of the air was a body. And it was a guy who had misclipped a rope 5,000 feet above us, and his body was traveled probably 1,800 feet through the air before it smashed into the side of the rock the first time. This gigantic explosion of red, and bounced down and eventually came to a stop 500 feet away from us. So here was 12 of the best climbers in the world. The body lands 500 feet away from us on the trail, and only 2 of us had the courage to go to his body. And when we got there, it was the most traumatized human being I'd ever seen. And the other guy who was with me had been a lieutenant colonel in the Marines, and Rod had served in 2 tours of duty in Vietnam, been shot 4 times in the back in Lebanon. He was just a complete badass. And we literally, 2 middle-aged men here, we literally grabbed each other's hands and held on to each other to try to give us the strength to touch this body, because it was so traumatized. And then we put our hands on him and just pushed as much love as we possibly can into his soul. And it was brutal. I mean, we had to rebuild him, and we had to package him up and then lower him down to where everybody was. And I remember we had everybody standing in a circle around this man, and I just looked up, and all of a sudden I knew the expedition was over for me, because as I was looking at 10 of these 12 guys, I knew I couldn't trust them. Like, if they wouldn't come 500 feet for a dead guy, would they come 5,000 feet for me if I had broken my leg? And I knew the answer was no. And so I literally started bawling, crying. And I was like, you know what, today's my birthday and I'm going home. I just quit the expedition. And that expedition taught me a ton. Most importantly is, what qualities are you looking for in a partner? And at that point, I had thought the best athlete, the guy who had the most, championship rings was who you want to be on the team with. And I realized that wasn't true at all. It's obviously the person you could trust the most. And so I went back, and a couple years later with one of my best friends, and we tried it. We got shut down at 25,500 feet. And both those expeditions, or both those years, nobody summited K2. And then I went back the 3rd year again with a team that I had built, and we were able to reach the summit without Sherpa support, without oxygen. We were just a super high performance team, and it was absolutely amazing what we accomplished. But I had spent 9 months of my life trying to get to the summit of K2. Had failed miserably the first 2 times. And as you know, those expeditions are not cheap. I mean, we would spend $40,000, $50,000 a person to try to pull these things off. So the amount of money that was spent, the amount of time and energy and calories burned, et cetera, was just outrageous. But for something about that mountain, I was so infatuated with it that I would keep going back to it. And it was worth it for me. Like, I look back at that experience on K2, and our summit day was brutal. I mean, 2 other people died on our summit day, not from our team. And we were heavily involved in a massive rescue. And, I was the last one to walk off of K2 that season. And the reason I was because I kept going through every camp, sweeping, making sure that nobody was left behind. And it was really one of those times in life when you really climbed a mountain in a style that you were going to be proud of forever. And that sense of, humility and satisfaction that came from that was just so, empowering. And I think that it affected every single aspect of my life. My ability to serve others in super stressful situations, my ability to dig deep, against failure after failure, to try to continue to figure out a way to get to the summit. Your ability just to, keep taking one step after another, all those things combined in that experience to really, deeply affect my life.
Yeah. So I had breakfast this morning with Ed Viesters, who you probably know Ed or know of him, one of the two. And so he's another guy that has climbed both Everest a bunch of times and K2. And he told me that he'll never do K2 again. It was one.
No, I wouldn't either after once.
Yeah. Garrett's trying to talk me into it right now. But, it's just, there just seems like there's just so many elements of this. And I think you're right, too. I go back to my sporting days in football, and not everybody can be the star, nor do you want them to be the star. You want to have people that have really honed their craft, that are good at what they do, but also getting back to that whole team. There's no I in team. And, I've been several times now where you're up and you get on Denali or Vincent and these other mountains where, you need to go in and start building up tents and building ice walls and other things. And I literally have turned around and like 2 or 3 people are just sitting there, and it just tells me everything in that moment, like who I can trust, who I can't. And it's just, I shake my head. It's just like, I don't even know what's going through their head. Like I have to do
but they don't know how to be a teammate, right? Because like in your life, you were taught how to be a good teammate. And, your coaches taught you this, whatever, your parents taught you this, but a lot of people have never had that experience. And even a lot of people think that they've been on good teams. And until you give them a new yardstick by putting them on a great team, they're going to accept tons of dysfunction because they just don't know it can be any better. I had the opportunity to spend a bunch of time with the coaches of the Ravens when they won the Super Bowl.
Yep.
And one of the funnest things about in all of these, different discussions that came out, one of the funnest things was in their weight room, they had stenciled, an NFL weight room, right? Like the amount of testosterone in that room, the amount of just iron that you're slamming on the ground, how freaking aggro the whole thing is supposed to be. They had stenciled the word love in giant letters across the weight room. And their whole purpose was just to remind everybody this team is going to win because of love. Right? It's 1,000 acts of small sacrifice for your brother, your teammate, that's actually going to allow this team to succeed in the end against, the odds, right? Like what's the odds of winning the Super Bowl? It's like, 1 in a gillion or whatever. So so it was so awesome that they distilled this, right? They took something that we think of as being so masculine and so fierce, so brutal, such a warrior activity, and distilled it into this one word, which was love. And then it completely inspired all of these NFL players to be the best version of themselves. Yeah. It's the same thing when you have these teams and you have these people that are laying down. You're like, man, this is just not doing it. Like if we are going to succeed, we have to succeed because we love each other and we treat each other with 1,000 acts of kindness and trust, et cetera. That's going to get us to the top.
Yeah, no, I love that. I had Trent Dilfer on the pod a couple of weeks ago, and he was actually the quarterback during that Super Bowl run, and never known as a phenomenal quarterback, although, his stats are impressive, but just a phenomenal team player and just really getting everybody involved in the game and really understanding everybody's role, certainly his. And the other part of that, too, is just because NFL guys or NBA or Major League Baseball people are big, strong, physical beings doesn't mean that they have emotions, and they do. And that's what that can really, connection of, and that's, I think, one of the things you're talking about is when you equate and you draw that parallel with love, and not necessarily, it doesn't have to be like you literally love somebody, but having that connection with them in such a way that you will do anything for them to make sure that they succeed, you succeed, and together you can create something great.
Yeah, and if you look at like any of these teams, whether it's a workforce team or a sports team or a climbing team, the more that we can get everybody on the team to be the best version of themselves for the whole time out there, the more successful everybody's going to be, and the greater the experience will be for everybody.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I spoke back in Florida a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things that I talk about, because it was taught to me, is the pyramid of success. I've talked about this before, and the very tippy top of John Wood's pyramid is competitive greatness. And the whole thing about that is that you can't have competitive greatness if you don't do all the little mini steps that may take years and years and years to hone to get that skill to be in the best position that when your best is asked of you, you can actually deliver on demand, but you can't be there again if you just start off and there's no shortcuts around making these things happen. So listen, I want to transition over here just a little bit in your entrepreneurial stuff, and I want to go back to a mountain really quickly that you have been on. You've experienced its wrath, but at the same time, something I think fantastic came out of it, and that is Denali at that 14,200 foot camp. And so I was reading that you literally were stuck in a tent, and I have been stuck in a tent. And as you go through the days 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you're just sitting there, you want to get out, you want to get around, and if people can imagine being a little 2-person tent, and you're just going literally batshit crazy, and then ultimately the skies part, but is it too late? If you run out of food, you go through all the different things. But in this particular moment, I want to go back to this idea that you had about creating climbing gyms, which has really spread in a much bigger level than probably you ever thought it was going to be.
Yeah. And Mark, first of all, congratulations on being such a damn good researcher. So yeah, we were stuck in a tent at 14,000 feet, myself and a guy who was in his late 30s at the time, and was probably worth about $1 billion. He's a brilliant developer. And, after as you said, you go through the fourth, fifth day, you've just gone crazy because you've read everything. There's nothing left to talk about. And at some point, I started mumbling under my breath that I always wanted to open an indoor climbing gym. And he was like, his ears perked up, and, he's super entrepreneurial. And so he and I worked on the projections for a business, and the only paper we had was toilet paper. And we had a Sharpie marker. We literally wrote all of the pro forma for an indoor climbing gym. And this was back in 1995. So this was ages ago. And we wrote it all down on a piece of paper, on this piece of toilet paper. And he said, okay, if you could prove that you could pay me back, I'll lend you the money to do this. And so and I also had to get him off the mountain alive. So anyway, the storm stopped, and we literally were too atrophied to continue to go up. We tried, but we had to turn around. And so we ended up back to the plains, back to the lower 48. I converted toilet paper into Excel, faxed him off this 5-year projection proving I could pay him his money back. And 15 minutes later, he called me up and said, okay, where do you want the cash to be sent? And so this is a guy who's obviously trust I had earned through that expedition and multiple expeditions. And he was a brilliant mentor for me. I mean, he had built over $1 billion worth of real estate. So when I was trying to figure out how to, open my first climbing gym, he coached me through that whole experience. We're still best friends. And we turned that $400,000 into the first climbing gym. I had actually started the business a couple years earlier, as a guide service with $592. So fast forward, I sold that business recently to a group of a private equity group, a bunch of guys out of Harvard. And that $592 we turned into tens of millions of dollars. I can't tell you the exact number because of confidentiality, but so I got to retire at 53, and I'm I'm in a pretty good situation for a climbing bum.
That's awesome. I mean, that's what it's all about. And look, I think you talked about 93, 94 or something, and now we're here at 2018. So I'm sure you had the gym for 10 plus years, right?
Oh yeah. We had the whole business I had for almost 30 years by the time I'd sold it.
Yeah. And so one of the things that you're doing right now is, just because you're speeding through the story, you're going from, the introduction to the last chapter in 30 seconds. And what you're not reading is the, 54 chapters in between. And in between are, I'm sure, the ups and downs, and are we going to make it? And should we expand? And why didn't we get this membership renewal? And as you start to expand, just you putting all 10 toes right on the edge of the cliff, and do you jump or do you not? And so I've been through those things, and it's scary and exhilarating all at the same time. And so I'm sure there's a lot of life's lessons that were learned in that mixed bag in there. But at the end of the day, you were able to propel forward, obviously surround yourself with the right people, and make this thing happen.
Yeah, we were really blessed. I mean, we helped really invent the industry, which was a fun part of the whole process. And there's a lot of cool things that happen. I think it doesn't really matter what the activity is, right? Whether you're making widgets or building climbing gyms or whatever. I think the funnest part about the whole thing for me was having built a team that was really a true family. And families get tested in all sorts of crazy ways. And the end, I look back at the evolution of our organization, the evolution of myself as a leader, the evolution of all these people. And I think by the time right before we sold it, we had really brought it to its peak, and not just financially, but most importantly was how we treated people. And we had 2 major cancer scares. And I think that these were the 2 most defining moments of our organization. The second one was a guy who'd worked for me for about 5 years. He had his wife was pregnant, and he had a 3-year-old daughter. And on a weekend, I get a phone call, and it ends up this guy had been diagnosed with an incredibly rare form of cancer, where the longest anyone had ever lived was for 14 months. Wow. And so we mobilized instantly. I go right over to his house. He was in the middle of doing a bunch of construction on it, young guy, first house, who was trying to increase the equity as much as possible. And I just turned around and said, look, dude, you have to hire a contractor. Here's $20,000. Don't even think about trying to do this work. And everybody in the organization stepped up, and, everybody has a role to play. And I think this is really important for a lot of us in a leadership position, was that each of us has, like, let's just say this guy had 10 needs, and each of us could have filled 7 or 8 of those needs. But what we did instead was we just took the 10 needs and we distributed 10 needs across 10 people so that everybody could have the opportunity to give to the best of their potential, on something that they were a little bit more of an expert at. So I was in a situation, where I could tell them a bunch of things like, you don't ever have to show up for work again. We're going to continue to pay your wife. Like you're set. Like your job is to take care of yourself. And, there was other people that could take care of, like, coming in and making sure his house was clean and making sure that, there was food on the table and all these other tasks that needed to be done. And it was really because 10 of us, which then had a ripple effect to the next 10 and the next 10. And suddenly, in an organization of a couple hundred people, there was a couple hundred people that were in this situation where they were just giving whatever they could to help this guy out and help his family out. And man, I tell you, that just having gone through that experience was the most important experience of why you build a business and run a team, so that when people's real needs are being laid out there, the team can rise to the occasion. And everybody became a better person because of that. I mean, just as you know, every time you give, you get so much more in return. And everybody had that experience. And sadly, he only lived for another 8 months. And, when you went to his funeral, it was unbelievably beautiful. Just everybody there to support the family. And, the organization was able to kick in a bunch of money towards scholarships, et cetera. And it was just, it was what you were called to be there for. Yes, you thought you were building widgets, or you thought you were building climbing gyms, but what you really were there to do is to serve other people in their moment of need. And having built an organization that rose to that occasion is absolutely the thing I'm most proud of.
Hey, I'm excited to introduce our new partner of the pod, Cascade Mountain Tech, an outdoor brand from the Pacific Northwest, which is where I'm from, that offers a great selection of trekking poles. They're incredible. Super coolers, camp chairs, LED lighting, and much more. Right now, Cascade Mountain Tech is offering 15% off your first order by using the code FindingYourSummit15. That is FindingYourSummit15 when you check out at CascadeMountainTech.com.
No, look, that's really cool. And I think what you're talking about right now is contribution. And, to anybody who's listening to this pod right now, I want to just really emphasize this point. And it's all good. If there's some major crisis, I'm sure many of us, if not all, have donated to the Red Cross or something. There's a typhoon in XYZ part of the world and people are devastated. And so you want to help them that way. And then you write the check and that's all you do. And what you're talking about is really rolling up your sleeves and getting involved emotionally with the family, with what's going on. I had an opportunity to do this with Chris Long, who won Man of the Year in the NFL this year. And he started this organization called Water Boys. And so it's really building water wells and to actually be there in these tribes, these villages in Tanzania, in the Serengeti, and see that reaction and see the effectiveness you have firsthand. I mean, talk about bring tears to your eyes and just, really feel vested so much more than just giving money, which we raised a lot as well. But it's just, it just takes again, we go back to that word connection to a different level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like, why, again, why were we put here? Right. So, and it's amazing how sometimes we thought we were given one set of skills or opportunities, and then we were like, wow, we could actually leverage this to all these other things.
Well, I mean, again, let's go back to preparation meets opportunity. And I think, in your case, you started off as a mountain guide and that kind of led, there's all these things connected in some way.
Yeah.
And the guiding business led to, hey, why don't I start a climbing gym, right? Those would be cool. And that one led to 2 and 3 and 4. And now you start to get some success under your belt and you build up that resume. And then the next thing you know, one of your employees unfortunately gets cancer. And now you can really rally your team around this effort to try to help the family and help him and other people. I'm sure the story doesn't stop right there, but that's, as you said, that's what our calling has been. It's just, you got to put yourself out there in order for things to come back.
Yeah, yeah, and I think we're, the one fun. There's lots of great reasons why mountaineering is a metaphor, right?
Yeah.
Because like it taught us all this stuff. Like, how do we build teams? How do we build partnerships that are really going to be there for when we need it? How do we see improbable goals and continue to figure out how to reach them?
Yeah. So yeah, no, it's all good. I want to shift just a little bit here,
Mhm.
and you've led 200 plus expeditions, and what I want to kind of focus on right now is how you got into the world of media, and specifically I'm talking about television, and
Yep.
specifically I'm talking about ABC, NBC, the History Channel, and these other ones. And it's just fascinating to me, like, how does this guy that's just climbing, and it's hard to wrap your arms around stuff like that. I'm trying to get some energy going behind what I'm trying to do
Right.
for my Everest climb next year. But like where did this, was this your idea, or did they come to you, or how did that whole thing develop?
There's all sorts of different pieces because I did about 4 or 5 different shows, and so I actually guided the first ever reality TV show on Everest. And that was terrible TV, but it was an amazing opportunity.
Yeah.
And when we like when we did a show on climbing K2 for NBC, we were nominated for 6 different Emmy Awards, and it was, if you ever get a chance to go to the Emmys, which you may have been there, it's a pretty freaking good party. And but that came about because a really good friend of mine owned at the time the Pimlico race horse, which is where the Preakness is. So it's part of the Triple Crown. And we were literally lifting weights in his basement at about 9:00 on a Friday night. And I was telling him, yeah, I'm going back to K2. And he's like, oh, you should film it. I'm like, oh, no, this is a terrible idea. And he goes, no, let me make a phone call. And he called this guy up who happened to be standing at a urinal at a hockey game in Boston. And he was a NBC broadcaster, had done 9 different Olympics. And
Wow.
he was like, you know what, send them up to New York City. So I got in the train, went up to New York City, and I was walking across Rockefeller Center on a Monday morning in December, and this gentleman comes out of the crowd, and I recognize him right away from television, and he's like, "Hey, we have a meeting on the 36th floor of NBC, with Ken Chanzer, the president of NBC Sports." So we go up, through security, we go up to this gigantic room, and there's 6 of these senior vice presidents sitting around a table, and trying to tell them about climbing K2, which, the chance of getting to the summit is basically 0. And so they asked me a couple of questions. Amongst them was, can you get us an Emmy? And I'm like, well, of course I can get you an Emmy. And so Mr. Shanzer grabs me by the shoulder and leads me back to his office. And I'm looking up at Mr. Shanzer and I'm saying, okay, Mr. Shanzer, like, how much are you going to pay for this? And he goes, son, you're no Oprah. Oprah gets paid, you get opportunities. I'm like, Mr. Shanzer, how much is this opportunity going to cost me? And he goes, I don't know, $500,000. And so I get back on the train with my $500,000 opportunity, and I'm trying to figure out how to pay for it. And I decide I'm going to call Kevin Plank, who's the CEO of Under Armour. And so Kevin and I had started our businesses around the same time. And so in Baltimore, so I call up Kevin. I'm like, hey, Kevin, we need to have a meeting. And so he goes, show up at the Under Armour office the next day. And so I show up there, and he wants to show off to me the new mountain division of Under Armour, which at that point was only making snowboarding clothes, right? So you could imagine how comfortable a pair of snowboarding pants would be trying to summit Mount Everest, right? Yeah. And so anyway, takes me into this little coat closet where there's this guy sitting on a bunch of catalogs, which is now his desk. And I'm like, all right, Kevin, look, I need $500,000. He goes, Chris, we spend $500,000 every year on Post-it notes and paper clips. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe this. I've had 2 business meetings in the last 24 hours. One I'm going to get an Emmy for, and the second one I'm going to get $500,000 for. And I walk out of there, high as a kite. And the phone rings, and it's this guy, Todd Montesano, which to this day is my nemesis. Well, he was the CFO of Under Armour. He's like, listen, we're not giving you $500,000. So they gave me some fleece hats at $20,000. And suddenly here I was, had promised NBC that I was going to make them a television show, and I had no money. And so scraped together a bunch of cash, went to Best Buy, bought some cameras, and then we showed up on K2, and it was Blair Witch. We just took out the cameras, we focused them in the generally right direction, and there was no character development. Like, if you know what makes a good story, right? It's like, the character, you probably don't even know our names by the end of it. All you know is that 3 idiots go up on K2 and get the living crap kicked out of them because we captured K2 in its absolute worst weather-wise. And you just see the three of us covered in ice one minute, getting blown around by the wind the next, suffering, struggling. And we caught 42 hours worth of film. And we brought it back to NBC, and they were blown away. Turned it into this hour documentary, showed it a bunch of times, nominated us for all these Emmys. And there we got to go to the Emmy Awards. And man, for a second there, they announced the finalist, and I was gripping my wife's hand, and like the adrenaline pumping through my body. And
that's incredible.
Yeah, but we didn't win.
Yeah, look, you're at the plate though, right?
It was so awesome. Yeah, I would have felt bad winning. Actually, I thought it would have been almost too much. So, but it was cool. And then that kind of stuff just led to the next. In fact, literally today I got a thing from the Discovery Channel about a television idea. So TV's fickle, and TV's a really good way to go broke. So, I would probably make a lot more money in life if I had a paper route than if I had a TV career.
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm not in the TV business as well. So, yeah. So kind of rounding third base here. I want to talk about your leadership, what you do. Do you still take people around the world, and do you teach them in that capacity, or kind of like what?
Yeah, we do. I do a bunch of different things. Most of the work I'm doing with, let me take one quick leap back. When I first got into the outdoor field, it was through classic outdoor education. So I literally was a hoods in the woods kid taken out in the woods by my parole officer to kick the living crap out of me when I was 15 years old, and loved it. And so I somehow got involved in, that type of team building, and then that led to leadership. And around 20 years ago, I was doing a lot of training through climbing with covert and special ops teams. And so I was involved in all sorts of crazy things with the CIA and the Office Director of National Intelligence and the Defense Intelligence Agency and stuff. And that actually led to a phone call from Wharton, which is the top 3 business schools in the country. And so Wharton hired me to come in and start doing leadership development work for them as well. So I had a 16-year career taking Wharton students out on expeditions and using expeditions to teach high performance team building stuff. Well, fast forward to today, and really, I don't want to sound too mercenary, but it really was the way that paychecks are written in this field. And so I realized you can make a lot more money keynoting and running workshops than you can running expeditions. And so I transitioned into working with a lot of Fortune 100 companies, lots of tech startups, et cetera, and other groups that really are. I tend to specialize in groups that are already super high performing, that are 98% amazing and trying to get 1/10 of 1% better, and going in and helping them, work on that little tweaking, just like going with and hanging out with the coaches of the Ravens, when they won the Super Bowls. Like, they were already 99.9% excellent, but could we have a couple of conversations that might make them think a little bit different? And the fun thing about working with those kinds of organizations is that they are so excited and curious about evolving that they you can go really far in your intellectual journey with them. And so I really have specialized in working with those kinds of teams the last bunch of years.
That's great. I mean, look, you're recently retired, and this gives you a way to stay in the game and get there, talk about things that you're passionate about, and really, impart. I think it a little bit differently. It's just really paying it forward in terms of the things that you've learned from all the lessons that the mountains offer us. 1, 2 is the different clients that you've taken, personalities, traits, everything else that over the years that have really sunk into your brain and your mind, your body, your soul, about what it takes to be great. And then the third thing is being able to go around and share and impart that wisdom to many of these different corporations. So it's just, it all works and all comes together. It's great. It's a great way to kind of, maybe this is your next chapter in your life.
Yeah, I think it is. I think at some point I would like to have another small team, because I just love the daily interactions with people. I mean, you just can have such a bigger impact on somebody if you're with them for, 5 years than if you are with them for 5 hours. So, but I do truly honor the work that I get to do with corporations these days. It's really, it's such a fun intellectual journey. And when people, it's hard when you're in a company to compare yourself to groups out, to other companies, because you just don't know. And so when someone like myself comes in, I use survey tools, et cetera. And then all of a sudden I'm like, hey, you guys are actually freaking amazing. And if we just tweak these 2 or 3 things, it's really going to be cool. And the fun part as well, Mark, is that so many people that are in positions of leadership are like athletes, like that they're a little bit faster, they might be a little bit, have a bit better understanding of the playing field so they can make things happen that other people can't do. But there are a lot of them need to start to transition themselves from being the athlete to the coach. And, you're an athlete because you're intuitively great at stuff. You don't necessarily understand what makes you faster than the other guy. You just know you're faster than the other guy. And as the coach, you go and you start to observe people and you're like, oh yeah, well, if you do this, this, and this, or if you do this consistently, if you take your best practices and then just make them more intellectual, then you can go from being, athlete to coach. You can now scale your organization. So instead of it just being all about you, you could have 10 people that are even better than you, taking this organization to a whole nother level, which is what we did. I mean, we took our company, started with $592, and by the end we had 2 million customers a year and 1,000 employees. I mean, we only did that because we were great at making new generations of leaders and empowering them to go out and, not relying on us to solve their problems, but them solving problems we didn't even know existed.
Absolutely love that. And that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
So, hey, listen, so where can people find you?
The best place to look for me is just on my website, chrisbwarner.com. So Chris as in boy, Warner.com.
Yeah. Boy wonder. There he is.
There you go.
Not exactly that. So we will put that in the show notes, but hey, listen, I really appreciate coming on the pod, learning about your journey. And, climb, play, grow. That's what you're all about. And, again, superstar, and keep pushing, keep growing, okay?
All right. Thanks, Mark, and good luck to you. And congratulations on all your past successes as well. I mean, we're really privileged to be able to be international mountaineers. It's a good way to explore the world and ourselves in the process.
He is Chris Warner. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you so much for dropping in and listening to another amazing episode of Finding Your Summit. Truly incredible people doing spectacular things in life, and I hope you were inspired just like I continue to be. Look, I am super grateful that you came in and subscribed to this pod, and would be more than appreciative if you gave the show a ratings and review on iTunes. Trust me, it matters. And then also go share it with your friends, of course. Okay, until next week, go do something great, and remember, it takes a little more to make a champion. Bye. Hey, and thank you so much for listening to the Find Your Summit podcast. We are so glad to have you along for this journey. And if you enjoy the show, please tell a friend, share it on iTunes, spread it to the planet. We're looking to broadcast this to every person that is out there because, as you know, everybody has their own summit that they're going after. Okay, if you're looking to follow my journey, you can find that through my social links on markpattisonnfl.com. That's Mark, M-A-R-K, Pattison, P-A-T-T-I-S-O-N, NFL.com. So, until the next podcast, just remember, clear eyes, full hearts, and remember, it takes a little more to make a champion, so make it happen. Thank you. Bye.